vanishingly small constituencies, conceiving of identities intersectionally as coalitions, illuminates new avenues of cooperation. Furthermore, intersectionality as a critical project reveals politicized identity categories to be held together variously by tacit, unspoken, deliberate, and explicit acts of alignment, solidarity, and exclusion, about which we must become more reflective and critical if mass organizing for social justice is to be effectively pursued. While many interpretations and deployments of intersectionality construe identity categories in essentialist terms, against this trend, I draw on social movement history to argue that conceptualizing identities as coalitions is internally heterogeneous, complex unities constituted by their internal differences and dissonances and by internal as well as external relations of power, enable us to form effective political alliances that cross existing identity categories and to pursue a liberatory politics of interconnection. Okay? What does it mean? Conceptualizing identity coalitionally allow us to overcome some of the pitfalls of political alliances organized on the premise of homogeneous or essential identities. For one, the integration of all aspects of our individual identities is crucial to achieving the internal balance missing in one-dimensional political movements. Okay? Too often we are asked to subordinate one or more aspects of our identities to that which a monocular analysis privileges as significant. But in so doing, we are foreclosing a potential coalition with all those who share the repressed or excluded identities. Okay. But in so doing, we are foreclosing a potential coalition with all those who share the repressed or excluded identities, not to mention betraying the possibility of a coalition among all parts of ourselves. What does it mean? Okay. Cranshaw's conceptualization of identities as in fact coalitions challenges us to summon the courage to contest exclusionary practices that marginalize some people while constructing other people as representative or prototypical of an entire group, community, or movement. Then marginalize some people while constructing other people as representative or prototypical of an entire group, community, or movement. Despite the power of Cranshaw's argument, internal exclusions and marginalizations continue to structure U.S. social movements, and even intersectional theorists tend to reify essentialized group identities centered on the intersectional identities of a few members. Okay, so it's a problem of centering something. Those who experience what have been theorized as multiple forms of oppression continue to face political intersectionality. The experience of being situated between two political movements, claiming to represent them but pursuing mutually exclusive and often conflicting agendas that conspire to marginalize and fragment experiences of interlocking oppressions. But have there been cases in which liberation is imagined in multiple registers, in which identities are conceptualized as plural, not singular, and movements are premised on finding the interconnections of struggles by forming relationships of accountability and compassion across lines of difference and dominance, internal as well as external to group identities? What? Forming relationships of accountability and compassion across lines of difference and dominance, internal as well as external to group identities. And what political effects can centering the experiences and analysis people who face multiple marginalizations have on the ways in which struggles and solidarities are envisioned? Okay. In this essay, I examined the role a coalitional conception of identity played in the solidarity activism of one US-based organization. Somos Hermanas, we are sisters, the solidarity project of the Alliance Against Women's Oppression, housed at the San Francisco Women's Building, began as the multiracial delegation of lesbian and straight women to Sandinista Nicaragua in 1984 at the invitation of the Association de Musée, 이거 안 풀었어, 스페인인데, Espinosa. Over the 6 years of its duration, Somos Hermanas grew into a national organization, with chapters in multiple U.S. cities, expanding its focus to El Salvador, Guatemala, and other Central American and Caribbean nations subject to U.S. imperialism. Then hasta Somos Hermanas dissolved in 1990, yet I extend my exploration of its legacy into the present by focusing closely on the experiences of a key organizer of Somos Hermanas, Carmen Vazquez, a member of the first 10-day delegation and a national co-chair of conceptualizing identities and coalitional terms. Conceptualizing identities in coalitional terms enables us to cross lines of difference in building alliances, which is crucial to any effective liberation movement. Conceiving of our identities as coalitions intimates an integrated practice of struggle. Yet no less significant a lesson to draw from Foucault's activism and political thought is the political coalitions that attend to multiple forms of oppression help their members to integrate their identities as people. Identities that through systemic oppression and monocular resistance movements have been fragmented, distorted, repressed, or negated. My analysis of Somos Hermanas draws on three main sources. The oral history project, and archival research that I conducted, intersectionality and coalitions. At the outset, it is important to emphasize that Crenshaw's reconceptualization of identities as coalitions troubles a commonplace distinction between coalitional and identity-based groups. Okay. Crenshaw. Coalitions are usually contrasted with identity-based groups in the following way. Identity-based groups are spaces of similarity, seclusion, and safety, whereas coalitions are spaces of difference, confrontation, and risk. Coalitions are born of necessity, not in order to fulfill needs of recognition, belonging, solidarity, or inclusion. Oh, that's interesting. They are born of necessity. That's quite new. You seek those things from identity groups where others like you invite you in, share and affirm your experience, and offer their analysis, insights, coping strategies, and support. Yet, Bernice Johnson Regent's argument that feminists should pursue coalitional rather than separatist politics rests on the astute and painful observation that separatism on the basis of identity almost always excludes some people who nevertheless identify, say, as women or as lesbians. And so, for many of us, identity-based groups are not experienced as homes, but as bared rooms. Another metaphor Regent uses to describe identity groups. Crenshaw, too, deliberately disrupts the distinction between home and coalition when she invites us to think about how we might form coalitions in the name of parts of us that are not at home. Okay. Okay. There are at least two interpretations of the claim that intersectionality should lead us to think of identity categories as in fact coalitions or as potential coalitions. Okay. That is the argument, so, in this essay. Okay. The first interpretation is that this is an ontological claim about the nature of identity. About what identities are. I should change this into, the center one. The second interpretation is that this is a political claim about the possibilities of organizing across differences, but even across identity categories. The two interpretations bring to mind the analytic distinction Leslie McCall makes between intercategorical and intercategorical intersectional approaches. Conceptualizing identity categories as in fact coalitions, I want to suggest enables us to focus simultaneously on intergroup and intergroup differences. The second interpretation, that an intersectional analysis should lead us to form coalitions with other groups. Intersectional analysis should lead us to form coalitions with other groups. Intersectional analysis should lead us to form coalitions with other groups. What does that mean? Okay, assumes that intercategorical distinctions constitute coalitions. Okay. But if identity categories are coalitions, constituted by internal differences as much as commonalities, then this changes how we think about the political task of coalitional organizing. The emphasis shifts from forming coalitions across group differences to recognizing that groups are already internally heterogeneous. Yeah. The experiences of their members, including those people exiled, unrecognized, tokenized, or denied visibility within the group, are discontinuous, differentiated, sometimes even in conflict with one another. That is not to say that members of a social group have nothing in common, nor is it to say that groups dissolve under the intersectional lens into individuals whose experiences are entirely idiosyncratic. As every group occupies a location of heterogeneous commonality, I want to advance the view that identity groups are coalitions by virtue of their internal heterogeneity and the tacit or explicit creative acts through which they are organized and represented as unified. Models of coalitions that presuppose the fixity of coalescing groups and the homogeneity of collective identities elide intergroup differences, a danger to which intersectionality as a critique of categories alerts us. I don't know what they're saying. Yet identities are also political coalitions, in the sense that when viewed intersectionally, they illuminate interconnections and interrelations, as well as grounds for solidarity that reach across and reveal differences within categories of identity. But our common experiences are a bond, not a political roadmap, as Vasquez has written. Reflecting on the U.S. LGBT movement, Vasquez observes that our ability to work effectively in political coalition with those who share with us the assaults by the right wing has been hampered both by the single lens focus on oppression based on sexual orientation and by the misguided notion that we can address racism and sexism within our all movements through consciousness raising without a political agenda that specifically addresses racism, sexism, and economic injustice. Mm-hmm.